Most people in the modern world live as slaves, not to others, but to their emotions. One insult and they burn with anger. One setback and they drown in despair. One distraction and their focus shatters like glass. They call it passion. But the Stoics had another name for it: weakness. Because the moment you let emotion dictate your choices, you surrender your freedom. You stop leading your life, and your emotions start leading you. That's why the Stoics built their philosophy around one unbreakable law: discipline over emotion, the law of control. Marcus Aurelius, emperor of Rome and student of pain, wrote in Meditations, "You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength." But let's be honest. We all know this, yet almost none of us live it. We know we shouldn't react in anger, yet we do. We know fear is irrational, yet it still paralyzes us. We know we shouldn't give up, yet we quit when things get uncomfortable. Knowing isn't enough. The Stoics knew it takes training, daily, deliberate training, to control the mind before the mind controls you. Music swells softly, low drums, echo of rain. Let me ask you, who really runs your life, you or your impulses? Because every time you rage, overthink, scroll mindlessly, or give up too early, that's emotion in control. That's the untrained mind steering the ship while you're asleep at the wheel. The Stoic doesn't suppress emotions, he studies them. He observes their rise, their pull, their lies. He doesn't kill emotion, he conquers it through understanding. Because once you name it, it loses its power. The world tells you to follow your heart. The Stoic says, guide your heart with reason. The world glorifies passion. The Stoic glorifies principle. Passion may start the fire, but without discipline, that same fire burns everything you build. That is why the Stoics didn't chase emotion, they channeled it. Anger became clarity, fear became fuel, and pain became purpose. That is what real control looks like. Not numbness, but direction. Epictetus was born a slave and found more freedom and self-control than his masters ever knew. No man is free, he said, who is not master of himself. Freedom isn't doing whatever you feel, it is being able to feel everything and still choose what is right. Think about that. The Stoic does not fight emotion by denying it. He conquers it by disciplining it. Music deepens. A far-off war horn recedes into the distance. Emotion without discipline is like a wild horse, powerful but dangerous. Discipline without emotion is a statue, stable but lifeless. The Stoic walks the line between both, mastering emotion with logic and feeding discipline with purpose. When fear whispers, he listens but doesn't obey. When anger rises, he channels it into action, not destruction. And when sadness hits, he observes, learns from it, and lets it pass. Seneca wrote, "He who conquers his emotions conquers the world." And that is not metaphor. Look around you. How many lives are ruined because people couldn't control themselves? How many relationships end in anger? Careers collapse in ego. Dreams die in doubt. Not because the world was cruel, but because they couldn't rule their own mind. The Stoic law of control isn't just philosophy. It is survival. Because when you lose control internally, the world will break you externally. But when you master control, when your mind obeys you, chaos can't touch you. You stop reacting and start responding. You stop fearing outcomes and start influencing them. You stop seeking motivation because you've replaced it with discipline. The Stoic knows emotion is temporary, but control is forever. Motivation fades, control endures. That is why they call it the law of control. Because it is the foundation of every other virtue. Music fades, soft harp notes linger, calm after the storm. Most people wait to feel ready. The Stoic acts when it is time. He doesn't depend on moods, he depends on principles. If it is right, he does it, tired or not, scared or not. That is discipline. That is strength. The Stoic doesn't seek the comfort of emotion. He seeks the clarity of action, because discipline doesn't care how you feel. It only cares what you do. And here is the truth that most can't handle. The greatest victories of your life will come on the days when you don't feel like it. When you wake up heavy, tired, angry, hopeless. That is where Stoicism lives. That is when discipline must lead, not emotion. Because emotion wants escape, discipline wants evolution. Music shifts, drums rise again. Like heartbeats in the distance. So when life tests you, and it will, just remember this: your mind is your fortress. Protect it, train it, command it. Every emotion that tries to storm your gates isn't an enemy, it is an opportunity. The Stoic doesn't say, "I will not feel." He says, "I will feel, but I will not fall." That is the difference between those who break and those who build. The undisciplined are prisoners of feeling. The Stoic is master of it, and mastery is what the world will always recognize, in silence, in strength, and in stillness. But control doesn't begin with silence, it begins with awareness. The Stoics knew that before you could master your emotions, you first had to see them clearly. Most people don't. They live inside their emotions without ever questioning them. They mistake reaction for reality. They confuse feeling with fact. To the Stoic, the first step toward freedom was to step back, to create space between stimulus and response. In that space, you reclaim your power, Epictetus said. It's not what happens to you but how you react to it that matters. It sounds so simple, but it is the most radical idea in human history. Because it eliminates all excuses. You're no longer allowed to say, "He made me angry," or "that ruined my day." Nothing ruins your day. Your interpretation does. Nothing makes you angry. Your permission does. The Stoic sees anger rise, but instead of acting, he studies it. He asks, "Why am I reacting this way? What am I really afraid of? What expectation did this break?" That is how control begins, not with suppression, but with inspection. You don't fight emotion head on, you outthink it. You pull back the curtain. Anger is usually fear in disguise. Sadness is often resistance to change. Anxiety is misplaced imagination. The Stoic studies each emotion like a scientist, calmly, curiously, without judgment. And the moment you can name it, you can navigate it. Music deepens, steady rhythm, like footsteps on stone. Marcus Aurelius wrote to himself, "If you are pained by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your estimate of it. And this you have the power to revoke at any moment." That's what makes Stoic control so powerful. It doesn't deny pain, it redefines it. What most people call suffering, the Stoic calls signal. Every emotion points to a lesson. If you're disciplined enough to look, but that is where most fail. They don't look, they react. Something goes wrong, and they panic. Someone disrespects them, and they explode. They let emotions drive them, and then wonder why they keep crashing. The Stoic doesn't do that. When chaos hits, he steps back, breathes, and lets reason lead. His power is in his pause, that 1 second between impulse and action. That is the difference between weakness and wisdom. Music swells softly, a single cello joining the rhythm. Control is a habit, not a gift. The Stoics honed it day in and day out. They didn't just preach it calm, but they also trained for it. Marcus Aurelius had to deal with betrayal, plague, and war. Seneca experienced exile and political persecution. Epictetus was born into slavery. Yet they all practiced stillness. Not because life was gentle, but because they refused to let chaos win. They had rituals. Morning reflections to prepare the mind. Night meditations to study the day. Stoic control wasn't built in comfort. It was forged in repetition. Every insult ignored, every emotion observed, every reaction delayed. Each time, the mind grew stronger. Each time the emotions grew quieter. Instead, the control became natural, not forced. As Seneca said, "No man is more unhappy than he who never faces adversity, for he is not permitted to prove himself." That again is the Stoic paradox. Adversity is your greatest ally. Pain teaches you patience. Frustration becomes the teacher of focus. The moment you stop running from emotion is the moment it begins to harden into discipline. The Stoic doesn't run from fire, but learns to stand in it without burning. Music fades lower, with steady heartbeat, like percussion remaining. This is why Stoicism isn't passive. It is not about pretending not to care, but about caring wisely. The Stoic still feels emotion, deeply, but he filters it through reason before acting. That is the balance. Emotion gives energy, reason gives direction. Without reason, emotion becomes chaos. Without emotion, reason becomes emptiness. The Stoic lives between the two, heart ignited, mind in command. When emotion rises, don't suppress it. Slow it down. The Stoic breathes before reacting. He waits until the fire cools, then decides. Because decisions made in emotion are almost always decisions made in error. He knows this truth. You can't think clearly when you are drowning in feeling, so he doesn't fight emotion in the moment. He observes it, lets it pass, then acts with clarity. Music swells, slow, powerful brass. Just imagine standing in the middle of a storm surrounded by howling wind, flashing lightning, and pouring rain. The average person would frantically seek shelter, scream out at the heavens, and lose their cool entirely. The Stoic stands firm. He cannot do anything about the tempest, but he can control his breathing. He can control his stance. He can control his mind, because that will do. Because storms always pass, yet your reaction stays with you. It becomes who you are. Discipline over emotion does not mean cold. It means clear. It means being focused when others lose themselves. It means doing what must be done, even when you don't feel like it. It means acting from principle, not impulse. That is the heart of Stoic control. Emotion serves you, not the other way around. Music slows again, a calm before the next lesson. Most people wait for motivation to act. The Stoic acts, and then motivation follows. That is why control is so powerful, because it gives you freedom from your own mood. Once you stop being ruled by how you feel, you start living by what you believe. And that, the Stoics would say, is the only kind of freedom that lasts. Discipline doesn't destroy emotion, it refines it. The Stoics never taught people to be numb or robotic. They taught them to feel deeply, but to command those feelings. Because the truth is, emotion is energy. It can break you or build you, depending on whether you are its master or its servant. That is what discipline does. It gives emotion direction. It turns chaos into force. Think of anger. Most people waste it, letting it explode, poisoning relationships, and destroying focus. The Stoic doesn't suppress anger. He studies it, then channels it. He asks, why does this anger exist? What truth is it pointing to? Then he uses it for fuel. Anger becomes strength to set boundaries, discipline to act with purpose, and courage to fix what others fear to face. Marcus Aurelius wrote, "The best revenge is not to be like your enemy." That is control, transforming fire into focus. The music builds slightly, the rhythm of a steady heartbeat. The same applies to fear. Fear is not weakness, it is awareness. It shows you what matters. The Stoic sees fear and asks, what am I protecting? What am I unwilling to lose? Then he acts in spite of it. That is courage, not the absence of fear, but movement through it. Epictetus said, "If you wish to improve, be content to be thought foolish and stupid." Fear of judgment is the first chain you must break, for until you do, you'll live reacting to other people's opinions instead of your own values. Pain too, the great teacher. The world tells you to avoid it. The Stoic invites it, not because he enjoys suffering, but because he knows pain reveals truth. As Seneca wrote, "Difficulties strengthen the mind, as labor does the body." Every hardship is a forge, every discomfort a sharpening stone. The undisciplined mind hides from pain. The Stoic endures it, and in that endurance he evolves. Music deepens, the hum shifting into a low pulse, a heartbeat of purpose. Discipline transmutes emotion into motion. Anger becomes action. Fear becomes focus. Pain becomes progress. The Stoic doesn't waste emotional energy in reaction. He converts it into creation. Every challenge is a workshop for self-mastery. He doesn't ask, "Why me?" He asks, "What now?" Because emotion screams about what is wrong. Discipline whispers, "What is next?" That is the difference between those who talk about growth and those who live it. The emotional mind wants sympathy. The disciplined mind wants strategy. The emotional mind says, "I can't." The disciplined mind says, "I must." And over time, that mindset changes everything. Music swells softly. The sound of distant rain returns, rhythmic, grounding. Marcus Aurelius was betrayed, stricken ill, confronted with war. And he never lost his cool. Not because he felt nothing, but because he refused to be ruled by feeling. He wrote, "Waste no more time arguing what a good man should be. Be one." That's Stoic discipline. The ability to act on principle even when emotion protests. Now, imagine just how powerful you would become if you stopped waiting for motivation. If every day you acted with discipline, not desire. You'd stop quitting early. You'd stop chasing quick highs. You'd stop being pulled by moods. You'd become consistent. And consistency is unstoppable because emotion burns fast, but discipline burns forever. Music fades lower, steady, reflective tone. Here is the paradox of control. The more you discipline your emotions, the freer you become. When you don't react impulsively, you can see clearly. You stop living like a puppet pulled by external strings, validation, fear, approval, comfort. You start to live with inner authority. The world stops controlling you because you no longer control yourself through emotion. You command yourself through reason. That is why Stoicism isn't about escaping life's storms. It is about sailing through them with precision. The Stoic doesn't suppress emotion. He steers it. His discipline is the compass. His virtue is the map. His emotion, when trained, becomes the wind, and together they carry him through chaos while others drown. Music builds, the tone grows stronger, more resolute. As Seneca once said, "No man is more powerful than he who has himself in his power." You can conquer nations and still be a slave if you can't master yourself. You can have wealth, fame, admiration, yet crumble at one insult. Real strength doesn't come from dominance. It comes from discipline. But discipline isn't built in comfort. It is built in resistance. It is built in those moments when emotion screams louder than reason, and you still choose reason when you want to quit but continue anyway. When you want to lash out but choose silence. When you want to flee but stand your ground. That is the crucible of control, and it is where the Stoic earns his peace. Music stabilizes, soft piano leads in. The calm after conflict, the Stoic law of control teaches us this. Emotion is not your enemy. Undisciplined emotion is train it, and it becomes your ally. Observe it, and it becomes your guide. Master it, and it becomes your power. But there is something deeper, something most people miss. The Stoic doesn't just practice control to be strong. He does it to be free, to live without being owned by feelings, approval, or fear. Because the highest form of freedom isn't doing what you want, it is doing what is right, no matter what you feel. Control isn't located in theory. It is built in the grind of daily life. The Stoics never sat in temples meditating on peace. They trained for chaos. They built their control in exactly the same way every soldier in the world builds his or her endurance. Through repetition, through discomfort, and through deliberate hardship. Because philosophy means absolutely nothing if it doesn't work. When everything goes wrong, mastering discipline over emotion, the Stoic begins with practice, small, relentless, and purposeful. Marcus Aurelius wrote in Meditations, "You will meet many ungrateful people today. But remember, they cannot touch your integrity unless you allow them to." That is where training starts. Not in quiet, but in conflict. Each insult, each delay, each frustration is a test of your control. The Stoic doesn't seek a life without difficulty. He uses difficulty as his gym when anger arises. That is a chance to practice patience. When fear whispers, that is a chance to practice courage. When temptation calls, that is a chance to practice restraint. Every emotion is a sparring partner, and the Stoic trains by staying composed in the fight. The sound of faint rain returns soft, rhythmic, meditative. Seneca used to go to great lengths to deliberately sleep on the floor, eat the plainest food, and wear old clothes. Not out of misery, but out of mastery. In fact, he said, "Set aside a number of days during which you shall be content with the scantiest and cheapest fare, saying to yourself the while, 'Is this the condition I feared?'" That is voluntary discomfort, the essence of Stoic discipline. He trained his emotions by denying comfort. He trained his fear by rehearsing loss. And because when life eventually stripped him of ease, he was prepared. Modern life teaches you to avoid pain, to chase ease, to seek constant stimulation. But for the Stoic, that is a trap. Comfort makes the mind soft. It convinces you that peace depends upon pleasure, that happiness is external. But control, true control, begins when you choose difficulty on purpose, when you take the cold shower, when you sit with silence, when you resist distraction. That is when you learn that your emotions don't have to dictate your actions. You feel discomfort, and you act anyway. Music deepens, a quiet pulse beneath the rain, like a heart steady under pressure. The Stoic knows, if you can't say no to small impulses, you'll never resist great temptations. If you can't hold silence in an argument, you'll never hold peace in chaos. So he trains, every day, to be stronger than his moods, to be greater than his excuses. Control isn't built in comfort. It is built in repetition. Epictetus said, "No man is free who is not master of himself." So how do you master yourself? You practice friction. When you want to procrastinate, you start. When you want to lash out, you pause. When you want to give up, you finish. Discipline doesn't come from feeling motivated. It comes from acting when you don't. Each time you do what emotion resists, you strengthen control. Each time you obey emotion, you weaken it. Music swells slightly. A soft brass note joins, evoking courage. The Stoic trains not just in hardship, but in perspective. He rehearses loss, not to be dark, but to be free from fear. He imagines losing what he loves, not to detach, but to appreciate. He reflects on death daily, not to despair, but to live fully. Memento mori. Remember, you will die. The reminder isn't morbid, it is liberating. When you remember how temporary everything is, emotions lose their grip. Anger feels smaller, fear feels unnecessary. You stop wasting time on reaction and start living in action. That is why the Stoic's life looks quiet, but feels powerful. He is not driven by highs or crushed by lows. He moves with steadiness, while others chase mood.